Okay, welcome back to the channel. Big video today. You're about to see some big fish. And here's the secret weapon that isn't so secret after all at this point, being screwed into my single jig jerk shad combo. The OG silver blade attachment. Available on my website cookingandfishing.com. As mentioned in previous videos, this is pretty much how I always present the single jig these days, especially from a beach. We'll cover situations in later videos where the blade doesn't play, but today is classic blade conditions. A shallow sloping beach, cold water, and a full high sun. That hammer nickel blade is catching and throwing light everywhere underwater, and it certainly paid off on this trip. So I've been fishing for about an hour at this point without a single bite. That short strike was the first sign of life so far. But as I discovered in recent years, these fish can either be in very isolated pods or for this point in the season have distinct bite windows where they turn on and off like a switch. My goal was to cover as much water as I could that day just to get a sense of how the fish were setting up, if they were beyond the deeper breaks or feeding at steeper lips, and it turned out they were holding on pretty shallow flats. Now, as you can see and hear, the wind has been absolutely relentless, and jigging in this wind is always a challenge with the 1/4 ounce jig head. You'll see me dip the rod tip down after a cast or in between pops. That's to keep as much braid out of the crosswind as possible. I made a video a couple years back on how to jig in the wind, which I'll link down below in the description, so definitely check that out. Ultimately, like anything else, jigging in adverse conditions take practice. I will say that having that spinner blade on the back of your jerk shad provides a lot of tactile feedback through your rod tip that you otherwise won't have if you just have a plain jerk shad rigged on the jig head. Sort of an added bonus to the blade attachment, I suppose. And just a reminder that the OG and painted Dirty Jersey blades are really optimized for the 1/4 ounce single jig, maybe up to 3/8 ounce, while the larger max blades are meant more for heavier weights and deeper water. And they are all proudly made and assembled in America. Oh! Oh! Yeah, not the best start, but at least I know there are fish in the area. At this point, I'm thinking I found a patch of dinks that are short striking my jig, and if that was later in the season, I would probably move on. But right now, with the bait scarce in the water, if you find any signs of life, there's a good reason for them to be there. So I pretty much stayed put and continued combing this stretch of beach. And mind you, staying put in this context doesn't mean you stand there and make the same cast over and over. That is never what you do for Fluke. I'm always moving at least 5 to 10 feet between casts, angling them into the current and wind as much as I can. You'll also notice that I'm moving my jig at a pretty good clip. Those of you who read my first blog post on cold water fluking will be familiar with this rule. Use the quickest cadence that still gets bit. Okay, first fish of the day is 23.5 inches. I'll take it. Quick note on gear. I'm using the Steez AGS 7.6 medium light medium paired to a C3000 twin power. Very bougie, very nice, but completely unnecessary for fluke jigging. However, what is absolutely essential is that you have the appropriate size gear. And that $99 Tatula XT rod I recommend paired to a Shimano Ultegra is all you'll ever need for single jigging. I cannot emphasize this point enough. Too heavy a setup and this simply won't work. You won't feel a thing in this wind, you won't be able to impart the right action to your jig, and you'll never learn the technique properly. You need the appropriate gear, and I have recommendations for every budget in the video description below. Second fish, 21 inches. I must say, this is not what I was expecting at all. Both the size and the girth of these fluke is not something I'm used to this early on in the season. I've caught some pretty fat fish early on in the past, but almost every single fish this trip was properly thick. It's enough for me to contemplate some borderline conspiracy theories, such as there being a resident population of fluke that stay put inshore year round. But I suppose if I were a fluke, I'd skip that migration to the continental shelf altogether. I'd be the fattest, laziest fluke you'd ever see, that's for sure. Yeah, at this point my mind is completely blown. And did you guys see how tight this fish was to the break? She was literally sitting in 2 feet of water, and I floated her in on the waves before she knew what the fuck was happening. She's literally doing all her fighting on the sand. Now this is obviously a big fish. You're about to see she's a SHOREMAT in both criteria. So she's over 25 inches and she's over 7 pounds. In fact, she's about 7.5, a little over 7.5 pounds. So my first SHOREMAT of the season, hopefully not the last. And at this point, the sheer number of 25-inch plus, 7-pound plus fish that has fell victim to the light single jig, by me and many other people, by the way. What can I say? If you're still high-low jiggling from land, you are missing the plot. Of course, the very next fish is the smallest of the day, and I saw him eat my jig. These fish are definitely pushing shallow on this incoming tide, at least they were that day. Now, you guys hear me go on and on evangelizing the single jig method. And while I certainly appreciate all the spinner blades people are buying, they obviously work and catch fish. That single jig virtual lesson is the real secret sauce on the website. I recently rewatched it again, and honestly, I can't think of a single element to this technique I left out in that tutorial. As always, once purchased, you'll have access to all the videos forever, and you'll also have access to me via DMs and email for any technical questions that might arise. Oh no! And just a quick reminder that Daiwa is increasing prices almost across the board come June 1st. So the steeds I'm using here is going from $550 to almost $800, at which point I can hardly justify recommending it to anyone for anything, really. Other items are seeing a smaller increase, but if you're looking to pick up a rod or reel from any brand, prices are definitely going up. So make your tackle purchases now. You really should have done that a long time ago. I think I talked about this in a previous video. Fluke fishing, especially from shore, only requires one combo. Even if you decide to experiment with jerkbaits and crankbaits in the future, you can do it all with the same rod, reel, line, leader setup you're using for single jigging. It's a very simple way to fish, and with the right gear, you are maximizing fun and efficacy at the same time. Really a no-brainer, so definitely make the leap. If you're still using a big heavy surf rod, now's the time to convert. Okay, plenty of big fish to come, and I'll end this session on a bang. But for now, I'll just let the footage run and jump back in later. Enjoy. So yeah, that wind is picking up and at this point is over 20 miles per hour sustained. I won't say it's easy jigging under these conditions, but with the right gear and technique, it's perfectly doable. Hopefully you guys notice how I'm walking up and down this stretch of beach, never making the same cast twice, and covering this section thoroughly has certainly paid off that day. Whoa. Stay down, buddy. Now once again, you guys see how quickly I'm getting to that hook set on these bites, and still half these fish have it choked down the hatch. If I waited a half second longer, if I quote let them eat, I would have killed many fish that trip. And here you see how this fluke's jaws are clamped shut with demonic force. Now imagine your jig head stuck inside those jaws. To break that jig head free and sink home the hook past the barb requires perfect mechanics on your hook set. It requires a full body pivot to supply the necessary power, all things I cover in a previous hook set mechanics video on the channel, as well as in more detail in the virtual lesson. And once again, that unhook 'em tool, absolutely essential piece of gear. Now, like I said, I ended this day on a bang. This fish, a little over 24 inches. I didn't weigh her because we spent enough time out of the water, but I would guess over 6 pounds, definitely an anomaly for this time of year. And so, quick recap, a double limit, 3 biggest fish going 23, 24, and an almost 26-inch SHOREMAT kicker. All on the single jig, all on the 6-inch jerk shad with the OG spinner blade attachment. Okay, I hope that was entertaining and useful. Thanks for watching, and I'll catch you guys on the next one.